all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including rss.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative.
We want to welcome to Veterans Radio a couple of Army veterans, a couple of Western Michigan University alumni and Broncos, and a couple of guys who went through the ROTC program and had a fantastic project they recently completed, preserving the 75-year history of ROTC at Western Michigan University. Tom Vance, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you, Jim.
And Mike Evans, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you very much.
Well, you both graduated from Western Michigan University in the same year. You were in the same ROTC classes. But let's start with that. Mike, why ROTC?
To be honest, I felt it was the best way to get a commission. I'd done some research. There's basically three ways to get a commission, either through Officer Candidate School, through West Point, or through ROTC. And as it turned out, it was an opportunity when I went to Western to get involved, and it worked out well. I was eventually offered a scholarship.
It clearly did. Tom, why ROTC for you?
Well, I'd always wanted to be in the Army. Probably ever since middle school, if someone asked me what I wanted to do, I would say I'm going to go to college and be in the Army. So I knew about ROTC for a long time. And I didn't have a scholarship initially, but I ended up getting a scholarship my last year that guaranteed me getting active duty, because at the time that Mike and I were getting commissioned, it was very competitive to get active duty, as opposed to just people who went into the reserve right after college. And so I did end up with a one-year scholarship that guaranteed me active duty after graduation.
Well, that's one of the things and most people don't know, and the rules change. You have to know what the rules are, both to get an initial scholarship with ROTC. You can get one before you go in, but a lot of folks get one after that first year or after that second year. So there's a lot of ways the program works to help students get into and pay for college, but also learn about leadership, learn about teamwork. Mike, talk about some of the things you learned in ROTC that maybe as a young guy, maybe you were still in the learning stage.
Well, like Tom, I wanted to be in the Army. My dad had served, and so it was an opportunity for me to serve the country. But the biggest thing I learned, and I think it distinguishes people in leadership positions, is the leadership itself. There are managers out there that are in charge of people, but truly ROTC taught us how to lead by example, and through a lot of different ways of showing, one, that you were focused on the mission, but two, that you cared about the people, and they were equally important to me. So it really was an eye-opening experience.
Well, when you're in that position as a college kid, you're pretty young, you're pretty green. So part of what ROTC teaches you is in the leadership skills, Tom, kind of advances you above others of your same age and experience, doesn't it?
Well, it builds a lot of confidence. The program is designed to, train you as a team. We're, besides the physical fitness part of it, we were trained in small unit tactics, and we had FTXs, field training exercises, each semester where we'd go out at Fort Custer and, go out in the field and train. And it was really great training. One thing Mike didn't mention about himself was that Mike was the cadet battalion commander senior year. So Mike was in charge of the cadet corps senior year at ROTC.
Well, there's speaking of a position of leadership. Mike, how long did you serve in the Army?
A little over 4 years. I was on active duty in Germany and stateside. I was part of the Berlin Brigade back when the wall was up, so that was a real great experience in and of itself. But yeah, I had to put in at least 4 years when I accepted a scholarship. I wasn't sure I wanted to make it a career, so I got an education delay to get my graduate degree at the University of Michigan. And after the 4 years, I moved on and actually went into trust work, which I did for 37 and a half years.
Well, one of the things you learned too, Tom, in that period, and maybe I'll go back to Mike on this because he went to Germany for part of his time, is, again, you're a young guy. You haven't seen the world yet. You haven't had a paycheck that you can spend yet. Makes you grow up and shows you the rest of the world, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Now, where did you spend your time, Tom, and how long were you in the Army?
Well, I spent 10 years on active duty. Started off in New York City, which is an interesting place to be in the Army. And then actually went to Germany for 3 years. My wife and I went there, and Mike was already in Germany. And so we were able to visit a couple times while we were both over there. And then came back and was at Fort Knox for 4 years. So I had 10 years active duty. Then I went into the reserve, and I spent 12 years in the reserve. 10 of those years I was teaching at ROTC at nighttime. I didn't get paid for it, but I got retirement points. So I was back at Western teaching an ROTC class at night. And then I had a gig where every summer for 2 weeks I go to Washington and do a public affairs job. And so between ROTC and the 2 week public affairs gigs, I cobbled together enough to retire from the reserve.
Oh, that's great. Again, it's not one of those things you necessarily plan, but as you say, you're able to cobble it together and build a career that gives you some retirement. And obviously, it was something you enjoyed doing. Otherwise, you don't stick with it. And then you came out, I think, and went into public relations and community relations at a couple of spots over in West Michigan.
Right, working at the Upjohn Company, the pharmaceutical, which became part of Pfizer now, and a public school district, and then a community foundation doing public affairs for all those organizations.
But along the way, neither of you guys, now you both picked up at Western, I think, degrees in history, BA in histories. You never lost the enthusiasm, apparently, for the ROTC program at Western Michigan University, because you took on what reads like an insurmountable passion project, really, of, hey, let's put a comprehensive 75-year history together of this program. What the heck were you thinking?
I think I know Tom maybe feels similarly. For me, it was more a labor of love. I helped Tom with the history. He did most of the narrative, and I worked on biographies of former cadets and professors of military science, and was able to put together at this point about 1,200.
Yeah, this is amazing. Each of you talk about, like, one of you concentrated on oral histories and somebody else concentrated on narrative histories. Tom, go ahead. Talk about your component of this. I've got a chart of the numbers, and unless you're an accountant, it'll make your eyes bleed. It's really amazing, the volume of work.
Well, and it was interesting how it all developed because, Mike and I, it was a 2-year project basically, and we just sort of kept it kept evolving and getting more and more in depth. I don't think either one of us envisioned that we'd end up where we ended up after 2 years of research. So initially I was focusing on, well, Mike and I both started at the archives at Western Michigan University, and the archives that had just tons of great materials that we started with. And I started assembling a narrative decade by decade of how the program was developing. And Mike was capturing photos from the yearbooks and the photo archives at Western. And so I focused on the narrative, which included some oral histories with alumni from several decades, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. We've got alumni talking about their experience, and that information got sprinkled into the narrative. And then Mike was focusing on all the biographies.
Well, probably if you knew how much work this was going to take, you'd never start the project. That's the only way these things really go, because it ended up being a 10-volume series. You wrote 58 pages on the history, Tom. And Mike, did you talk to 1,200 people?
No, it was a combination. We did post online through the department a series of questions for alumni to answer. And then in most cases, I followed up with those alumni to create a biography on them. In other cases, I found information independently from, obituaries and other means of identifying these people, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. And so in a lot of cases, I did talk to the alums, but in a lot of cases I didn't, and many had passed. So,
right.
And some weren't interested in talking. Not everybody's experience was a positive one, and as much as I think the vast majority was. When
you start going down that road with biographies, and I'm working on a project that's getting me in that same realm, you find out there are people who will just go back to private life, and that's their whole point. They just want to be private, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Talk a little bit, either of you, about there was a demographic change in who was in ROTC over the decades, the 75 years. What did you learn from your research that sort of, we can see this demographic change going on?
Well, I think, at least from my perspective, and Tom also did research on this, each decade had an interesting mix of individuals. The program initially in the 50s started out as a quartermaster school. And so, most cadets that got into the program came out quartermaster officers. And following the Korean War, there was a lot of people that did volunteer because there was a great deal of interest in serving. In the 60s, when Vietnam came up, we had even more cadets, but that was in large part because the draft existed, and ROTC was a way to, one, avoid the draft initially and come out with a different branch, perhaps, that maybe didn't require you to go to Vietnam, although a number of the graduates did end up in Vietnam and served very well. You got into the 70s, post-Vietnam, and that was kind of the lean period for the program. And then I think if you look at the 80s, 90s, 2010, 2020s, you had the introduction of women in the program, and really a more vast array, not just of people in the program, but the opportunities that existed. Say, for example, at Western, they had a lot of flight students and people that went into aviation. And so we had a pretty good contingency of officers that served in that area. So yeah, I think things definitely you could see each decade changing in terms of the type of people and the reasons for which they joined.
Yeah, from the outside it might look static. From the inside, it's not static. And good, as you mentioned, Western has this great aviation program, and I'm sure that drew people. I think I read that there have been something like 1,700 cadets commissioned out of the program since it began. Big numbers. And some of the information that I found interesting was like how many women, what percentage of women in different decades, as it went from 0 to, I think the high maybe is around 32%. That's kind of interesting. There are you captured data on folks who made grade at lieutenant colonels and above. About 9% of that group made it a career and achieved that kind of rank. Again, really kind of interesting data when you start analyzing it. Tom, what surprised you as you were putting it together?
Well, I was going to use the example of when Mike and I were in ROTC is an interesting point in the history because the Vietnam War ended in 73, and that's when the draft ended. So Mike and I and everyone that joined in 1974, we were like I think those are like the smallest numbers that the program had seen since it started. And uh, our experience was really impacted by the Vietnam War because there were a few of us, but the cadre had all had combat experience in the Vietnam. So that really created a intensity to the training we got. And it was just very inspiring to us. And I think we were sort of in awe of the cadre that we had. And the same thing had happened with people who joined the program when it started. In Korea, the Korean War started in 1950, and our program started in 1950. And so during the first couple of years of ROTC, the cadets had combat veterans assigned to ROTC as cadre. And so the Korean War impacted training a lot, and the Vietnam War impacted training, beginning with like our year groups. So I think that made a lasting impression on both of us. The kind of training we got and hearing our cadre talk about their experience in war, it's a very serious business.
Well, and we just have come out of a 20-year war a couple of years ago, Iraq and Afghanistan, or a global war on terror. Did you have an opportunity, Mike, to hear from those folks, those more recent graduates who had found themselves over in the sandbox?
Yes. In fact, one of them had written a book about her experience. Several had been in Iraq and part of the 91 venture, 92, as well as later. Both in Iraq and Afghanistan. So again, war is not fun, and the people that served really, in a lot of cases, made great sacrifices to serve and do their duty.
Yeah, you really have to have a commitment to the service and the country to go through not only ROTC program, but then meet your commitment those 4 years afterwards, or stick around even through more of that as you did, Tom. And certainly over the last 20 years, the op tempo of cycling back into combat for a lot of guys in the Army was at a level nobody ever envisioned. So I'm curious, are all of the ROTC scholarships at Western Army, or is there also Navy component or Air Force component?
It's mainly just Army ROTC. The Western has recently affiliated with Michigan State University, who has Air Force ROTC in addition to Army ROTC. So if you're a Western aviation student, let's say, and you want to become an Air Force officer, um, you can study at Western, but then cross enroll with Michigan State, and then you'd end up being commissioned as an Air Force officer. Not that everyone in the Air Force has to be a pilot, that's not the case. But
Right,
because
right.
Western does have a great aviation program, um, I think that's a recent thing within the last couple of years. But basically, it's just Army ROTC at Western.
One of the
The
things
other,
that
the
you
other part of
go ahead,
that,
Mike.
yeah, the other part of that is, you do have the option of going into aviation in the Army to the extent you're flying helicopters or combat support. Um, the other thing I was going to mention, we talked about the aviation school. We had a very strong nursing school, and so we had a lot of cadets that were commissioned in the medical corps field who served as well. So Western is a pretty progressive institution and has always been very supportive of ROTC, and we produced some very good officers over the years.
So this kind of project, labor of love, takes a lot of time doing research and being in the archives. And I want one of you to talk about the help you got from the university archives curator, because it can't be done without that kind of support.
Go ahead, Tom.
Take it away, Tom.
Wow. Well, like I said, Mike and I both started there, and then as we went our sort of two different ways on the focus of the project. I know we both kept using the archives at Western. Um, boy, the information that they had, like they've got commencement programs that informed us who was being commissioned every year. And Mike did a lot of work with that. I'll let Mike can talk to you all day about the data that he collected about the alumni. But yearbooks and course catalogs, because each decade the curriculum would adjust a little bit throughout the history, and we use those. Photos, like I mentioned, Mike did a lot with photos. In fact, I think, Mike, you've got like 2,000 photos that are represented in the 9 binders. That some of his one-page bios that he did, Jim, will have 2 or 3 photos on each of those um, pages, and so it's a great. And then Mike also illustrated the narrative that I wrote. Mike went in and illustrated it with photos and laid the whole thing out, and it really makes it more appealing when you can read decade by decade and see photos of the cadets.
Well, and I think the other part of that too is the archive staff, in answer to your question, were very supportive. They would sit down with us anytime we had questions, or they had ideas of where we could check to find information. So yeah, the staff there was very supportive, very helpful throughout the process. But yeah,
I saw that you ultimately presented this 9-volume or 10-volume body of work to the university, to the archives. Are they going to digitize it? What do you know what the plans are for folks to be able to? Hey, I want to check out with what Grandpa or what my aunt did. You guys have done work that I'm sure there are families don't know this history of their relatives.
Good point. The archives obviously has a copy, and they've preserved it, taking into account preservation methods for keeping the information intact. The Department of Military Science and Leadership at Western has a copy, and they have attempted or are in the process of putting together those biographies online so people can click in to see the biographies. They haven't been able to institute adding the pictures, which is disappointing. But I think, again, we're starting at one point. We're making some progress towards demonstrating information that basically had lied dormant for years. And it's going to be a process to get it out to availability to everybody to click on. But certainly that's our intent, to get it out as much as we can. I put, as does Tom, information on biographies, for example, on PDF. Tom's done it with the history. So there are ways we can communicate that information to individuals who have an interest. But yeah, it's a lot of information. So the idea of publishing it, doesn't make a lot of sense, because it just is so much. But if we can electronically and through the benefit of technology get the information out to people, then yeah, that's very much what we hope to do.
Well, that certainly sounds like a project the department should be able to fundraise off of and help do, because, as I say, and we've been doing Veterans Radio now for 20 years. We do a lot of writing in this area, and you often run into somebody who says, boy, I heard that story. I never knew that about my uncle. He never talked about his time in Germany or Laos or South America. And so I do think it's important that all that work that you guys put together becomes available, if for no other reason than those family members can search for their loved one and learn something from it. That's a great opportunity. So Tom, what's you just finished this. You two got another big project you're going to take on, or are you no longer accepting Mike's calls?
Oh, well, it's funny. Mike and I both serve on Western's History Department Alumni Advisory Council. I think that is it. And we've been on that for a number of years. And they asked us the same thing at the last meeting that we attended. And Mike and I just sort of looked at each other and shook our heads no, because it was really a very intense 2 years worth of work. And like I said, when we started this, we had no idea that we would end up with this body of work. And
that's great.
But
Mike, have you blocked Tom's calls? It sounds like he didn't block yours.
No, but we have spent a lot of time together, and so there is that, which both Tom and I know. It has been a challenge for sure, and a good challenge, I think. But neither of us anticipated how big this would become. But as an example, to me, the takeaway I see, the positive takeaway, is a number of the graduates, former cadets, that I spoke to. A lot of them said, "Well, I hadn't heard from the department since I graduated 40 years ago." So it told me that even though there's an open door, there's information out there for former cadets, former commissionees to reach out to Western ROTC. Western has a lot on its plate training these people, so there isn't always a lot of outreach to those that have graduated. And I think Tom and I both discovered that was something we could hopefully help with.
Well, in 50% of the folks responded, that number is actually much higher when you realize something like 23% of the folks are deceased. So it shows people are willing to connect and tell their story if given the opportunity. Both of you have done great work on this. It's really pretty amazing. Hopefully they will find a way to digitize it all and make it available to the general public. And maybe you started something here. Maybe somebody else will pick up the next piece of it. And we really appreciate the time you've given to Veterans Radio today. Tom Vance and Mike Evans, Army vets, Western Michigan University alum, graduates with history degrees. One kind of used it, one went into trust work. So that's a whole nother story for another day, isn't it, Mike?
There you go.
I really appreciate your time, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone.
It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows
by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, NVBDC.org, Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.